treading water. Is the Conservative Party, is there anything it can do to get out of the malaise, the low 20 points opinion poll rating it seems to be stuck in and has been for months? We'll explore the latest GB News official opinion poll, where we look at what the country thinks, and also at two big issues today: the online safety bill, that regulatory behemoth of the internet, and indeed, employment policy too. All of that after the headlines.
Good morning, it's 9:31. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. There are growing concerns for the welfare of a woman who went missing a week ago in Lancashire. Mother of two, Nicola Bulley, was last seen walking her dog just before 9 a.m. last Friday in St Michael's-on-Wye. Her phone and pet were found by the river half an hour later. Retired Met Police officer Graham Wetton says the force has to investigate all possibilities.
You really start with investigating the person themselves. And again, that then means you have to speak to those closest to them to find out about what was going on in their life, how they felt. Has this happened before? So various lines of inquiry. They have to keep an open mind and look at everything. You've seen extensive searches going on. That's quite a steep riverbank from the pictures I've seen. Dog was found as well. The mobile phone was found. So they've got some lines of inquiry around the phone itself and investigating that, but still keeping an open mind a week on into the search.
British Gas is under pressure to compensate its vulnerable customers. It follows a Times investigation which found debt collectors broke into homes to forcibly install prepayment meters. Regulator Ofgem has ordered all domestic energy companies to suspend the practice and says it's opening its biggest ever market review into the meters. Anti-Brexit campaigner Gina Miller has become the latest person to accuse the Deputy Prime Minister of bullying. She says Dominic Raab launched an abusive attack and was aggressive and intimidating during an encounter in 2016. A source close to the Justice Secretary described the claims as malicious and baseless, saying they were timed to jump on a political bandwagon. Shadow Immigration Minister Stephen Kinnock says it's time for Mr Raab to go.
I think it's pretty clear now that everybody that works around him is going to have some serious doubts about whether or not they should be coming into work today. There seems to be a pattern of behaviour from Mr Raab, and it's not fair on his colleagues that they are having to work with somebody who is potentially a bully and a tyrant and somebody who disrespects the colleagues that he works with. So he should be suspended.
Rail passengers are facing more travel disruption today, with train drivers walking out for the second time this week. RMT and ASLEF union members are demanding better pay and conditions. Rail operators are warning services will be severely disrupted, with little to no trains running in some parts of the country. And a suspected Chinese spy balloon is being tracked by the US military. It's been spotted flying over America for a couple of days. Fighter jets were mobilised, but a decision was made not to shoot it down because the debris could pose a safety risk. It comes ahead of a trip to Beijing by the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken. China says it hopes both sides can handle the matter calmly. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to the home.
Well, a very good morning to you. It's 9:34 and this is The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and your radio. First this morning, the results of the GB News People's Poll assessing what the country thinks of the big issues, and tackling sleaze has become a big issue. 1% of voters are completely confident in Rishi Sunak to tackle sleaze in British politics, while 55% are not confident. Indeed, adding up those who are confident by any means, 1, 6, 7 and 8 in varying degrees, that gets to 22% of people who have any confidence at all that Rishi Sunak can clean up sleaze. But on the issue of the teachers' strike, 48% say they support the strikes, while 28% say they oppose them. However, it's important to note the big 24% who say they don't know or prefer not to answer. And all that makes for grim reading for the Conservatives, who now find themselves 24 points behind the Labour Party, sticking around that 22 point in those national polls. Well, let's make some sense of it now with the legendary John Curtis, Professor of Politics at Strathclyde University, who joins me now. And John, is it surprising that the Conservative Party just hasn't been able to budge from this low 20s position that they've remained in for the last 4 months?
Well, of course, we have to remember, Tom, that Mr. Sunak did come into office with a very, very difficult political and economic legacy. The political legacy, of course, was the fallout from the Liz Truss administration, which did substantial damage to the Conservatives' reputation for competence, including not least in the economy. And meanwhile, on the economy itself, of course, Mr. Sunak finds himself in a situation where, yes, we have very high levels of spending, but public services are not working, not least the health service. We also have high levels of taxation, which makes many Conservative MPs deeply unhappy. And meanwhile, although perhaps the recession is not now going to be quite as bad as we anticipated, we are struggling to find the economic growth, which at the end of the day is the only way in which you can both deliver public services and achieve tax cuts. And meanwhile, of course, he's having to deal with a whole range of public sector strikes where the message from the government, although it's not explicit about this, is basically saying, yes, look, we believe that actually you are going to have to take a cut in your living standards. That is the only way that we can make the economy work effectively. But that's a very, very tough message to get across to voters. And therefore, it's not surprising, at least for some groups, including teachers, as in today's poll, the public are relatively sympathetic to the position of those who are striking.
There do seem to be a still rather large sample of people who say they don't know, or that perhaps they wouldn't vote, or that just refuse to answer these questions as well. Is this the big hope of the Conservative Party, that the closer that they get to an election, people may well think they might want to hold their noses or do whatever while they do it, but in the end they'll end up voting Conservative?
Well, certainly that must be part of their hope. The truth is, Tom, that whenever a party is in electoral trouble, as the Conservatives are at the moment, one of the things you will always find is that people who voted for them last time are much more likely to say they don't know what they're going to do. That, in a sense, is a symptom of a party that is in trouble. Whether or not it's the remedy depends, in truth, frankly, on whether the party can improve its reputation in the minds of voters. Sometimes those voters do go back. Sometimes they don't. But certainly the first step towards recovery for the Conservative Party will be to get some of those voters on side. And I think certainly one has to say that, even with the Labour Party well over 20 points ahead in some polls, as in today's poll, there's still no guarantee the Labour Party is going to emerge from the next election with an overall majority, because we have to remember they may well need something like a 12, 13, 14-point lead to get an overall majority. And the difference between that and the current poll position is not that great. The problem, however, for the Conservatives is that, frankly, they do actually have to win the next election in order to have much chance of remaining in office, because the party doesn't have any friends inside the House of Commons. None of the other opposition parties will be willing to help sustain a minority Conservative administration. And to that extent, at least, the dice are loaded against Rishi Sunak being able to remain Prime Minister after the next general election.
Because even if it's a hung parliament, Keir Starmer could cobble together a coalition or a confidence and supply agreement with the Lib Dems and the SNP and the Greens much more easily than the Conservative Party could. I wonder, though, what do we see in terms of enthusiasm for voting Labour? They seem to have made themselves as a party less scary for voters, in terms of people saying, being more likely to sort of consider the Labour Party now. But looking at some polls in the last few weeks, enthusiasm has really drained from both main parties.
Yes, the honest truth is that we have two leaders of our principal political parties, both of whom struggle to generate the enthusiasm and the emotions of the electorate, because neither of them is terribly good at rhetoric. Neither of them, particularly above all, is very good at coming up with clear strap lines, clear messages, clear visions that might actually enthuse the electorate. But I mean, in a sense, I think the truth is, Tom, you can look at the Labour Party's position as either the glass being half full or half empty. The half full version is that at least the party is sufficiently non-scary that when the Conservatives get themselves into a political difficulty, as they have done during the course of the last year, voters are willing to go to the Labour Party as the way of expressing their dissatisfaction, and intriguingly have not gone to the Liberal Democrats at all. On the other hand, yes, the glass is half empty in that Sir Keir Starmer is somebody who people go, well, he's all right, but I don't really feel very strongly about him. And people are still not clear what the Labour Party stands for. Now, I think one of the challenges for the Labour Party during the course of this year is to begin to flesh out much more what its policy position would be if it were to be in government. I think there are signs of that happening, but what there aren't clear signs yet of the party's ability to turn that into a broad message. You know, just remember Tony Blair in 1997, things can only get better. We're yet looking for Labour to come up with that simple strapline that might encapsulate its message for voters in one simple, easy, straightforward slogan.
In the late 1950s, The Economist magazine came up with a character they called Mr. Buttskill. And this was the amalgamation of Ra Butler for the Tories and Hugh Gateskill for the Labour Party, sort of saying that the economic policy of these two parties were as good as the same thing, that the Chancellor and the Shadow Chancellor and then the leader of the Labour Party could in fact be the same person. And I found it fascinating that this morning, The Economist magazine has introduced a new character to the world. They call it Miss Heaves, an amalgamation of Hunt and Reeves, the Chancellor and the Shadow Chancellor. And I wonder, do the public see there much difference now being between Labour Party economic policy and Conservative Party economic policy?
Well, I think it's certainly a very good question. To be honest, I've not seen any polling that has asked people on that subject, and maybe you want to get your pollsters to add a question to their poll next week. But certainly, the Conservative Party does find itself in a position where it's presiding over record levels of taxation and record levels of spending. That's what makes many people inside the party uncomfortable. But it does represent a remarkably centrist position for the Conservative Party. And yes, the Labour Party is equally now moved back towards the centre of politics and is not promising that much. Of course, it does raise the fascinating question of what the Labour Party would do differently in order to be able to turn things around from what the current government is doing. And perhaps that's also a challenge that needs to be posed to Labour spokesmen during the course of the next 12 months.
Well, Sir John, I think that's an excellent question that we will be adding to our poll next week to see exactly what the public think. Is there any difference at all between the economic policies of these two parties? But for now, Professor Sir John Curtice, thank you so much for joining us on The Briefing. Always appreciate your insight. Now, moving on, the controversial online safety bill raised its head again this week during its second reading in the House of Lords. The legislation, of course, continues to cause the government difficulty. The crossbench peer, Lord Stevenson, said that platforms had failed in regulating themselves and continued to use business models that relied on the engagement of users at all costs, regardless of what holds their attention. But does that mean that government regulation of the internet would be any better than the status quo? I'm delighted to be joined now by Baroness Arlene Foster, former First Minister of Northern Ireland and GB News presenter, of course. And Baroness Foster, or Arlene, you'll be voting on this bill as it goes through the Lords. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, we had our second reading of the bill just on Wednesday past, and I thought it was a very good discussion, actually, Tom, because there were a range of issues raised, primarily around children's safety, because when children go online, they can access a whole world to them, much of it very abusive and actually very worrying. And everyone will remember the very, very sad case of Molly Russell, who was bombarded by a social media platform with very harmful posts. And sadly, she took her own life. And even after she passed away, her account was still being bombarded with very harmful imaging. And it just shows that everything that we see online is not there by accident. It is controlled by these platforms. And therefore, government feels, and I agree with this, that the internet, social media platforms need to be regulated. And the proposal is that Ofcom will regulate the internet here in the United Kingdom. I suppose the discussion then goes to how much we do regulate and how much we allow free speech to continue on the internet. And I think it is really important that we do have free speech. But once that line is overstepped in relation to children's safety, in relation to committing criminal offences, then I think government has to act.
It's interesting because this bill appeared to be very controversial under the premiership of Theresa May and then Boris Johnson. When Liz Truss got in, she sort of injected this I suppose, distinction between what adults should be able to see on the internet and what children should be able to see on the internet. So the bill no longer sort of censoring the entire internet, sort of would view what children should see differently to what adults should see. Is that where the bill has sort of ended up? And is that a better situation than the blanket regulation than was first being suggested?
Well, I think there are still some lords, particularly on the left, who would like to see the controversial legal but harmful clause put back into the legislation. There may well be amendments that come forward in that regard. But I think there is a distinction between adults and children, and indeed between vulnerable people. We heard some very passionate speeches about those with learning difficulties and how they could be influenced by accessing material online as well. This is not about controlling, from my perspective, Tom. It's about safety. And it's about making sure that our children, when they access things online, they can't access anything online that they couldn't access offline. So it's about levelling out the field so that we keep our children safe. And I think that's really important. Likewise, I think it's important that we are able to access information if we want to online. There are some peers who would like to deal with misinformation, as they call it, and bring in controls on that. I don't agree with that. I think people who are adults should be able to make their own judgments in relation to that information. But I do think as well we need to tackle, and this is something I feel quite strongly about, this whole idea of anonymity of posting. So if someone threatens to kill me online and it's in an anonymous account, then you cannot bring that person to justice for doing that. So I think it's wrong that people can set up anonymous accounts, give out abuse, give out threats to kill, talk about some terrible things, violence against women and girls, but they cannot be detected because it's an anonymous account. So I do think we need to deal with anonymity online, as well as the issue of keeping our children safe.
And yet, when it comes to anonymity, there will be some journalists who are operating perhaps in oppressive countries, under oppressive regimes. There'll be many people who sort of see legitimate means for anonymous posting and anonymous accounts. How could a regulation like that make that distinction between when anonymity is clear and useful and good in a society and when it's doing harm?
Yeah, so I think there is a way to deal with this, and I recognise and understand the point that you're making around anonymity and the need for people to have that shield sometimes to speak out, particularly victims of violence and those in oppressive regimes. The way it should be done is that ID is given to the platform. The platform keeps that ID behind a firewall. That firewall is only breached if that person posts something that is criminal online and that people have reasonable grounds to believe that it is criminal. So, in other words, it would be kept anonymous until such times as the poster actually committed a criminal offence. And I think that's the way to deal with anonymity online.
And yet, if all of that information was kept behind that firewall, I suppose it would be states that would be able to access through that. What if it was a nefarious state? What if it was Syria looking for dissidents? What if it was perhaps a different flavour of government in the United Kingdom who wanted to come after people who might have the wrong sort of views on LGBT issues or anything else?
Well, I think the way to deal with that is if it is a criminal offence, then you can make an application to the platform to go behind that firewall. They will make an assessment on reasonable grounds. They will look at all of the issues that are before them, and they will make that assessment. I do think, Tom, people hide behind a cloak of anonymity. I'm not suggesting that this is a simple process, and indeed the size of the online safety bill will show to people how complex an issue that all of this actually is. But we need to tackle it because there are young people taking their own lives. There is a Wild West flavour to the internet. And why should the internet not be regulated when actually we regulate all other publishers, print publishers? We're subject to Ofcom rules, as you know, and indeed our print media are subject to regulation. Why should the internet be allowed to just run around allowing anything to happen that causes harm?
Well, there is that distinction between publisher and platform, a big debate raging on. Arlene, thank you so much for your perspective on it. And I know you'll be talking more about these issues and many more at 2 p.m. for the briefing with Arlene Foster. Thanks for joining us. Let's move on now, finally, to the implementation of stricter rules around benefits. Now, these changes over the last 2 decades have increased UK employment. But is all of that extra employment being put to proper use? Not according to the Institute for Fiscal Studies, who say that changes to the benefit system have only pushed people into low-paid, part-time and dead-end jobs. Well, I'm delighted to be joined now by Tom Waters, Senior Research Economist at the Institute for Fiscal Studies. And Tom, first of all, in a nutshell, what is the issue with people going from benefits into low-paid work?
Yeah, I certainly don't think there's kind of an issue with that per se. I suppose the question is does it end there? And so successive governments, the new Labour government as well as Conservative government since 2010 has made quite a big deal of trying to encourage out-of-work benefit recipients into work. But the focus has very much been on that in, out-of-work binary. And what we find is that although a lot of these reforms have been successful at pushing people into work, it's generally been into part-time, quite low-paid work, and not the kind of work which is, the first step on a ladder of career progression. Instead, it seems to people kind of stagnate there. And so that's what we're drawing attention to in this research. And certainly the policymakers should think about whether there's things that can be done which encourage more of that career progression and more into things like full-time work.
Looking at the sort of state of the United Kingdom economy, walking down sort of any road in any major city in this country, you'll see restaurants and shops asking for extra staff. It's clear that there is a bit of a gap in that perhaps more low-paid side of the economy. Of course, we've had a lot of migration this year, but mainly that's been into the higher-paid jobs. We've got a points-based system that brings in people with skills. Is it not necessary that we have, for want of a better word, native Brits getting off benefits and into some of those low-paid jobs that might well have been filled by migrants back when we had free movement with the European Union?
Yes, certainly. These jobs are necessary. We do need people to work in these sorts of industries, these sorts of roles. I think the question is when we're thinking about the benefit system, are we thinking about it kind of purely as something to protect people against real destitution, they're out of work, no other income, and they need to have some money just to have kind of any living standards? Or is it something where we should be thinking about, are there ways that we can encourage or enable people to reach higher levels of skills and achieve better jobs, contribute more to the economy in that way, and receive more in income for themselves. So I think that's kind of the key question. You're certainly right that being in work is often a good thing for the people involved and contributes towards the wider economy. But that in out of work binary isn't the only thing that really matters.
And in just our last 20 seconds, what would you say the government needs to do here in terms of to change around this situation?
If the government does want to do this, I think the key thing is to look at the disincentive to work full-time. So if you're on benefits in part-time work at the moment and you choose to move full-time, you lose a huge amount of your earnings in lower benefits and higher taxes. And so if the government does want to address this and encourage career progression, which is best encouraged through full-time work, they need to look at that financial disincentive.
Well, Tom Waters, thank you so much for that analysis. They're really interesting stuff to look at the shape of the economy. Well, that's it from us on The Briefing today. Back again on Monday, but up next, it's Esther and Phil.
Good morning, I'm Alex Deakin and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office. Friday's looking dry for the majority, pretty mild out there this morning as well. Not a huge amount of sunshine, most places staying fairly drab. High pressure is in control, certainly across the south. We've got low pressure and these weather fronts linking back, which are bringing a lot of cloud and in places damp starts, light rain and drizzle, clearing from Northern Ireland, but still affecting parts of northwest England. And it will be another fairly damp morning for western Scotland. The rain won't be as heavy as yesterday and it will push away to the north, so much of the west coast will become dry through the afternoon. Northwest England should also slowly turn a bit drier. Some brighter skies for Wales and southwest England. Could see some sunny spells further east as well. And it is mild temperatures this afternoon, getting up to maybe 13, perhaps 14 Celsius, where we see some sunshine. Even where it's damp in northern Scotland, temperatures are above average. The rain will continue to trickle across the Northern Isles through Friday evening. There'll be a bit of drizzle here and there around western coasts and hills, but for most places it's a dry night. There'll be a few breaks in the cloud, a few clearer spells, which may allow temperatures to drop down to 4 or 5 Celsius, but certainly for most towns and cities we'll see the temperatures holding up at 6 or 7. So a mild start to the weekend, and for most it'll be a dry day on Saturday, certainly for England and Wales. Some drizzle around the coast and hills of Wales, and we will see some rain heading into Scotland and Northern Ireland. Initially into the northwest. By lunchtime that'll be spreading across Northern Ireland and then through central and southern Scotland during Saturday afternoon. It won't rain all day, it will move through. And western parts of Northern Ireland, northwest Scotland likely to turn a bit brighter through the afternoon. For most of England and Wales, much of the day will be dry and again mild, double figures almost across the board. But look at Sunday's temperatures, single figures. It will be turning cooler, but as well as that, we'll have light winds on Sunday and plenty of sunshine.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you.
GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance.
Now we're here to represent you.
Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the